Hi everybody and welcome back. Hope you had a good break. My name's Snow, I'm from Holly. I'm one of the sponsors for today's event. Next up we have Simon Collier-Baker and Carl Frost from Flight Centre HQ in Brisbane. Flight Centre is a global brand at the top of its game at the moment. It services a growing range of sectors and recently acquired Go Volunteering. I have a personal interest in as I've only got one name, in these guys personally fixing the ticketing system for booking flights. So I have high hopes. Hopefully they're going to tell me how they're going to do it. So let's find out from Simon and Kyle what it's like to migrate Australia's most popular travel site to Drupal. Put your hands together for Simon and Kyle.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Let's go. So Flight Centre is one of the world's largest travel agencies. We've got over 2,000 leisure, corporate and wholesale brands. We've got businesses in 11 countries, and all that started 30 years ago with one shop. So we've had pretty remarkable growth. Currently our network extends throughout Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, United Kingdom, South Africa, Hong Kong, India, China, Singapore and UAE. And we try to provide travellers with a complete service. In the online space, we have 120 staff. That includes web developers, SEO guys, copywriters, SEM, back-end developers, online marketers, you name it. We've got a lot. A lot of those are distributed in different countries. So in the previous question and answer, one of those questions about global teams was from us. We're still trying to figure out how to actually manage that. The bulk of the work is done out of the Brisbane office, where we have 30 web developers. But we also have teams in the UK and US and South Africa who manage their own local sites. Some of the sites have up to, and I think over 200,000 pages actually now. That's probably an old number. And the larger sites like Flight Centre Australia have around 500,000 views a day. There's also multiple booking engines for air, hotel, sea, insurance, car hire. Not all of those are in the scope of migrating to Drupal, but possibly some of them. And as far as infrastructure goes, it's based physically in Brisbane, but a lot of it's now moving to the cloud. And Carl will talk about later moving into Arquia's hosting and things like that. There's just a few of the logos for a few of the brands and a few of the countries that we're in. So I guess I'm here to talk about why we decided that the way we currently build sites is bad and why we needed to change, and then ultimately why we ended up picking Drupal. The current system is based on a pretty old IBM solution, WebSphere, if anyone's familiar with that, I'm not sure. But it's been completely hacked to death with a whole load of other in-house developed systems, to the point where IBM don't really offer any support anymore for it. We can't really upgrade it, and it really just isn't doing the job that we need to do. There's way too much technology and technical people needed for the most simple change to a website. Changing just simple content, you know, the business just engages with one of our developers rather than trying to do it themselves because it's just too hard. Because of that complexity, it takes us at least a few months to get somebody up to speed on the system when we get a new starter, and that learning curve is obviously just far too long. That's an overview of what it currently looks like. As you can see, it's just lots of disparate systems that kind of in that diagram maybe look like they talk to each other nicely, but in reality they don't. And you can sort of see out to this side here, the content management system, which is not really part of the whole system. It just sort of renders out flat content, and that provides us with a lot of problems. So you can probably tell from that diagram why we need to change, but the business reasons are to give the business back control of their sites so they can make simple content changes themselves, to increase the time to market, to reduce that need for such highly trained technical people in order to make simple changes, to really just make the whole process much less complex, less moving parts, remove all those multiple points of failure, increase the stability, and ultimately reduce the costs for the business. So similar to SBS, as I spoke earlier, we went through a process of trying to figure out what we needed to change in order to get to where we wanted to be. And it was sort of a bottom-up approach. So we had to try and, we as developers, I mean, had been screaming for a long time that this isn't the way that you should build websites. This isn't the best way to do this. So we really had to come up with a business case for why we should change and then push that up through all the different levels of management. So these are just some of the things we went through that a new CMS that we wanted had to achieve. The open source part was really preferable, but we did look at non-open source CMSs as well. Obviously, the large active large and active user base that's been talked about already. Just the skills that are available in the market, so we could bring in the people we needed to get where we needed to be. Acceptable to our global teams. What I mean by that is that they're able to then take control of their own destiny in some respects and make the changes that they need to make for their particular websites, and still have that support out of the global office back here in Australia. And obviously, based on the previous diagram, you can see we have quite a lot of different third-party and other systems that any website we produce has to be able to integrate with. We probably didn't have as much of a buy-in as perhaps was spoken about by SBS. We didn't quite have the amount of time to go through all the different solutions in that much detail. So we really had to shortlist down to just a small few that we could concentrate on. We evaluated each of those based on its reach, its user base, whether it offered all the pieces of functionality we needed, and then it was just a case of, okay, we'll get each of these, we'll try and build sites on each of them, and then we'll reconvene and go over the pluses and minuses of each. It also then came down, obviously, to the numbers. So how much is it going to cost, not only in license fees, but in hiring the people we need to produce it. We had 30 developers that had a certain skill set, which is mainly PHP based, but not entirely. So if we were going to make the decision to move completely away from that, were we going to have to get a whole new team or train everybody? All those costs, it all adds up when you start going through it. Then with the 160 sites, how are we going to migrate those? And then again, with the integration with other systems. So the winner out of all that was Drupal, which is why we're at DrupalCon. And really, I guess, just going over the same things that have been talked about today already. So the strong, active community. There is a module for that in a lot of cases. Kyle will talk in more detail about some of those modules where they may or may not quite fit exactly what you need, but it's a good starting point. The price is obviously right. It's free in a lot of respects, so that's always good when you're trying to sell that to upper management. The productivity benefits from our current system were just glaringly obvious. So we were getting sites done, simple websites for sure, but we were turning them around in such a short time compared to what it used to be that it was a no-brainer. And then obviously we started talking with Acquia and all their support that they've given us in terms of hosting and best practices and providing us with a lot of technical support as well. And also the other sites out there that use Drupal, so your Al Jazeera's, your Time Warner's, if those guys can do it with the amount of traffic that they're getting, then Flight Centre should be fine. So I'll hand you over now to Kyle, who will talk to you about actually implementing Drupal and what we've learned so far.
Hello. Okay. So can everyone hear me? Yeah. So I probably just want to reiterate the actual business problem or challenge. So I was given the task of actually implementing Drupal into Flight Centre and using it as our current our CMS going forward. So really we've got 160 websites, so we've got a number of existing sites, but plus we've got a number of new sites that seem to be coming along each week. One of the main big projects will be the FCM corporate website, which is a site that's going to be spread across the world in 69 different countries, and each of these countries will want to manage their own content, plus use content from a global perspective. So if there's a global change that happens on the global FCM site, then they want that to filter down through all the country sites, and then how's that going to be translated into the different for the different countries. I think Simon said we've got 30 developers, so I think that number 25 developers is wrong. So we've got 30 developers to train, primarily with front-end development skills, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We do have PHP developers, so the choice was for a PHP CMS. We have a lot of internal services that Flight Centre use, so the product catalogue, which, as I'll go through a bit more, is the critical path to actually migrating these sites onto Drupal. We've got a number of external services that we use as well. And as we, just from the discussions before, we were the people who asked about the global development teams and how best to manage that and the follow the sun methodology and all that sort of thing. So we obviously got a lot of questions and a lot of things we still need to try and answer, so we don't have a lot of answers to some of these questions and issues that we've been coming up with lately. Change management. So when we go to the business now, when the business come to us, instead of just throwing us a Photoshop document with a nice, pretty marketing website, now we have to go back and tell them, we have to think about this a bit more. Where's the content coming from? What's this doing here? And all that sort of stuff, instead of saying, okay, we can just cut this up into static HTML and put it onto the site. So going back to the business, say, let's have a think about it. Let's go through a normal a process that will assist us to, time to market wise to achieve their goals. So that's the challenge and where we are now. So we're sort of still starting out a fair bit, and Drupal's been in place for around 2 months now. So when I say in place for 2 months, I mean around 2 or 3 months ago we've launched our first site onto Acquia. We have delivered about 10 minor sites, and myself and Simon and Lou are the other team that have been responsible for assisting with those sites being launched. These sites, although smaller, they've been a great learning curve for our big sites that are going to be starting off really shortly. We've trained 10 developers so far who are running with these smaller sites, and most of them seem to enjoy the change from the current architecture to Drupal. The next goals are the major site conversions, so the flight centres and the student flights, so who get a large amount of traffic, a large amount of attention, not only externally but also internally. We've got an optimistic goal of Q3 this year, so I don't think at the moment we'll probably hit that quarter. Might be the next quarter. So the approach after we chose Drupal was to identify what are we going to convert first, or how are we going to go straight with the Flight Centre site, start out big and then work our way small, or start out small and work our way big. And I guess at that particular time we had a number of businesses coming us with brand new sites. So we said to ourselves, well, what's the point of putting them onto the current architecture where we know we can do it? And we'll know we will eventually do it on Drupal, but charging them again twice to convert it onto Drupal again. Existing websites, so we had a look, larger websites, smaller websites, and smaller websites that will integrate with the FCM internal systems, such as the same as the bigger brands do. So the couple of smaller sites that we've pushed up live at the moment is the Corporate Traveller website. For Australia, so that actually was a case for the business to prove that we could do this. So we could integrate with the product catalogue, we could integrate with things like Akamai and Google and Gmail and all those sorts of technologies. QuickBeds, which I just launched last week, is our first responsive website. It's more on the SEM side, so it's not the actual booking engine website for responsive. So they asked us to do an SEM component of Drupal and make it responsive. And there was a number of static websites, so the Flight Centre Travel Group, which is like the global Flight Centre website, that was more of a static website that we had to implement across. So just to reiterate again, after we identified these websites, and we needed to go through all our current architecture and identify what we needed to still use in the Drupal world, and the big part of it is the product catalogue. So if you ever go onto a Flight Centre website, you'll see a lot of products. That comes from our product catalogue, and that's an internal system where we have teams pushing constantly and feeds coming from external suppliers into this product catalogue, which consistently update every day on a ad hoc basis. Could be a small amount of products per site to a large volume of products. So an example, the Escape Travel will probably be importing on a daily basis around 35,000 products. The other thing that we ultimately needed to integrate with is obviously Flight Centre's sort of online strategy, where, as you can see, there's two approaches. You can either book online with the domestic and international booking tool, or if you can go to a product page, you'll see mostly it's more of an inquiry-based system. So we need to hook into our internal inquiry-based system or the consultant inquiry management system. So what basically happens is if a user comes to that product page, they punch in the details, and if they come from a certain postcode, they'll get picked up by the internal system and routed to the correct consultant based on skill or even just location. Our external services, so we're currently using Akamai on our existing architecture, and we wanted to still utilise that service on for Drupal. Google, we basically use Google for everything internally in Flight Centre, so our Gmail, our document sharing and all that sort of stuff. So we wanted to solve the solution of a single sign-on, and Drupal assisted with that as well. And for our corporate sites, we integrate with Marketo and Salesforce for more of the brochure marketing and sort of conversion of new clients for the corporate traveller sites. The next thing we did at that same time, as we've already mentioned about the skills, we performed a bit of a gap analysis of the current skills we have and what we actually needed to get the job done. Now, we've got some pretty talented front-end developers. We do have some talented back-end developers as well, but what we actually needed was people who have converted Drupal sites before. So then that just basically told us straight away that we needed to go to the Drupal market and hire people. We also needed to have more of an expert skill, so more of a senior type developer, someone who's been in the community for a long time, has been involved with more of the development side of building Drupal sites. The next approach is more of the way that things sort of happen quite quickly for us in Flight Centre. So we were asked to basically take away from the day-to-day business. So another office opened up just down the road from our headquarters, so that was an opportunity for us to take the Drupal team, implementation team, extract it away from the day-to-day business. And we're actually quite lucky with that, because that has assisted with the migration, because we could just focus solely on building the sites in Drupal rather than getting hassled day-to-day with the current architecture and current businesses. We identified the need to train in teams rather than train people individually. And to do that, and also keep our current day-to-day business going, we looked at providing our developers with an incentive stretch. So not only do they continue their day-to-day work, but if they worked out of time or they worked between hours in the day-to-day and they assist with migrating Drupal sites across, then we'd give them an incentive stretch, incentive based on that. Another thing we identified was to give one person accountability, and that was me. So that was great. And one thing I had to ensure, and one thing I definitely have learnt from being at Flight Centre, is you've got to ensure that you keep everyone in the loop, because you could wind up with the current mess that we have at the moment. So if there's a particular way, or there's an idea of a solution that needs to be implemented, I prefer to go and get everyone involved straight away, just to make sure that we can cover off all the different parts of the problem, rather than just going in and implementing a solution based on what I know, and then go ahead and fix any of that. And that's been working so far. So what does work? Just flat out, Drupal and Acquia have solved the complex hosting and infrastructure problem, as Simon's already showed you what our current infrastructure. So basically now, if there's a problem, we know where to go look now to fix it. Whereas we could take up to a day or 2 days in our current architecture to actually go and find what the problem is, because it's so fragmented. Acquia now assists with us pushing our sites live, so instead of going through a formal internal process which could take a week to schedule internally with Flight Centre, now we actually own the own destiny along with the business to push these sites live and managing that whole development to stage and production workflow. Drupal itself has just reduced a lot of tedious and complex tasks that we currently do now. This might sound a little bit weird, but in order for me to push a banner live for the Flight Centre website or a student website, or no, sorry, a business to push a banner live, they'd actually have to call me at a certain time of the night and say, can you render this banner out? I'm like, shouldn't any CMS, where the goal is to, you know, time to market, to promote products, be something that is controlled to the business? So Drupal, out of the box, solved all these problems. And as I could say, from the current sites at the moment, I have not seen one crazy request come through based on the existing architecture that we now see in Drupal. So I think that's already winning at the moment. And in saying that, the business now has more power. I can see the tasks that we actually get assigned to or asked to redevelop on the sites are more development pro, new features, things that will assist with conversion, rather than I need a new whole URL structure, can you put a rewrite in to make this URL go like this? So really the business is now in charge of controlling their own destiny. The time to market, I mean, the guys that we've hired, the developers, the more the junior Drupal developers to get these static sites out, I can completely tell you right now that the time to market our sites have just increased dramatically. And one thing that Flight Centre prides itself on is the brightness of future of our employees. So where I foresee that there was only so far a developer could extend their knowledge in the front-end world, but they wanted to go into the back-end world, I think implementing Drupal gave them that option. It gives them both the option. They can stay on the front-end world and work in that whole responsive design and working with the business and the user interface, but if the people wanted to, you know what, I want to go and see what the back-end world is like, and you know, we did have those people with those skills in the front-end, then they have that choice as well. So that was a big tick for us personally. What's worked? So hired skills. So not only from the Drupal community, but also from Technocrat. So first of all, we went out to the Drupal community to see what was out there. So there was meetups in Brisbane, which is meetups are all over the world for Drupal. So we went there and assessed what skills were out there. We actually hired 3 Drupal developers just straight out of the community, and we were lucky enough to have developers who have implemented sites before, but were willing to train our current developers as well, which was a big tick for us. Technocrat provided us with a highly skilled senior developer to assist us with the critical path of the project, which is the product category import. Acquia supplied us with a technical account manager, Simon Lindsay, who is absolutely fantastic and helps us solve more of the larger scale problems coming forth, and is always there to make sure that we don't do anything stupid, and just is providing with that reassurance. One of the other things that we looked at doing is how do we migrate our current crop of developers straight into Drupal, and how we do that over time. One of the things we did realise straight away is going through guides and just learning off the internet is probably not going to assist for the Flight Centre way we want to build things. So what we actually did was we engaged with Technocrat and said, hey, this is our problem. We've already got a site up. We've already got lots of sites going up. We've already got a number of modules installed and customised modules that will be reused across the site because we have a multi-site setup. What we want to do is with the training of the team is go through the basics, go through the views and the templates and the theming and all that sort of stuff. But one, I want it to be based on a site that they're going to convert across, and 2, that they use the current modules that we've already got in place. So Technocrat came in, they did an analysis on their modules, got an understanding of how things work, and they ran with the training schedule. So when the guys come out, they were actually ready to go off and finish their site. So to me, that was a big tick. Another thing that's worked is just the smaller sites. For a quick business win, they wanted to see progress in just pushing sites out quicker and faster, because like I've said already, we get hammered with new sites every week. This is just a quick short slide. What else has worked? The developer role separation, so I'll explain to you what that looks like in the next diagram. Applying internal processes, so I'll take you through what we've done for our module selection internally, and code reviews. So one of the problems, or one of the challenges we had was we had a variety of skills now in the Drupal world. We had a senior Drupal developers. We also just had I say intermediate Drupal developers and junior Drupal developers. And we've also had people who were just coming on board who only had front-end developers, and they're creating new sites all the time. So what we actually implemented here was a sort of a release. We identified 2 roles: development team and then release managers. So more of your senior developer people who understand what's going on in the Drupal core and all that sort of stuff. So basically a workflow would be if one of the developers who are working on a new site go out and just for some reason don't follow process and just install a particular module, and then they want to go push that up to the site. What we have now is with GitHub is sort of a code review before it actually gets migrated across into the production development. So they'd push the module up, they do a pull request in GitHub terminology that would notify the gatekeeper or the release manager, and they won't have control to push that until they actually go through and say, you know what, this module already exists, you just didn't look hard enough, or you've actually affected the core here. So then they wouldn't be able to get any further than that. If it was okay, then the gatekeeper would then go through, do load testing and all that sort of stuff, and then push it up to the Acquia cloud so when they can test, so they can start testing. The only issue this was great to start off with, especially with the new developers, but you could probably see there's a bit of a bottleneck here, because once people started getting used to Drupal and knew what they were doing, then they'd have to continually go through this pull request type of scenario. So we're looking at a continuous integration system here, so something that allows developers to push up modules but then run simple tests across it to allow it to get to at least the development stage of Acquia so the business can test what they're doing. And then we'd probably go through more of an iteration of what gets released into production. But that's challenges to come. Drupal modules. So I've heard a lot today, and we all know there's just about a module for everything so far. And that's a good thing as well, and it's a challenging thing some other times. What we found a lot is because of the unique way Flight Centre works, a lot of the modules had to be customised for Flight Centre specifically. And I'll take you through 3 modules that I know the guys have worked on, and then the different issues that they've come up with, and some of the wins just because modules already exist. So the first one, which is more related to the critical path, which is the product import. Now we're importing massive amounts of products. We first identified there was a module out there that could help that, and that was the feeds module, which was great because we actually used that to push the corporate traveller worksite and integrate the products onto the site, and that worked, and that was great. So we proved to the business that we could get those products on there. But what we didn't realise to start off going further is how is that going to scale? So then we looked at performance and looked at breaking it down in segmentations of the feed that was coming through, and then we started to realise the actual size and the complexity, not only on our internal infrastructure, so what they were actually giving us, but on the Drupal end. So then what the developers started doing is they started going through the feeds modules and they started extracting each part out. What's taking longer? What's actually slowing this down? Because once we started doing more on load tests, we noticed that it couldn't handle the type of load and what we're going to need it to scale for. So the guys continually customised the feeds module until they realised and said, you know what, we're going to have to write something ourselves. And that was fine, because that was a journey that we had to go through. The next module we wanted to talk about was the Akamai module. So that already existed out in the Drupal community, which was great. However, it didn't really integrate with our infrastructure on the Acquia side, which was fine. So what the guys did then was grab the Akamai module. They actually then extended it to integrate with Acquia, and then that fitted on. And that was a real win for us, because now we've got Akamai on our websites, which was one of the main challenges. The next part is the web forms, so the consultant inquiry email. So the idea is, at the moment, that's all based on JavaScript. So we needed a solution in the Drupal world and how we were going to look at managing the query system. And web forms did the trick to start off with. So we didn't really have to extend too much. There was a couple custom fields, but the time to market for that particular was great. So going forward, for Flight Centre to start contributing back to the Drupal community, I think what we're doing, because we're so sort of early into the stages of the project, is probably go through these modules and go through the current standards that the Drupal community asked for when contributing back, and then make sure what we push up there in regards to patches actually meets those standards. So it might be a bit of time before we start contributing back. I just want to make sure we do it correctly and that it supports the Drupal community out there. Challenges. So, like we said before, we were the people who asked the global development team management problem that we've got. So we've got a UK-based team with one team leader, and around 5 developers who are looking at going onto the Drupal world. We've got a USA team who just gone out of the blocks and just went Drupal crazy and didn't wait for our solution to come through. So trying to rein them in, or if that's what they want to go, that's the way they want to do it. We've got developers in the South Africa who are currently happy with the architecture. So we've got all these different types of global teams out there, and the challenge is how we're going to use and reuse code across and follow the sun type of methodology, and what support systems we're going to interact with the global development teams. FCM is going to be a massive challenge. So 69 sites that are going to be managed by 69 different countries. We probably have 69 different ways to do things on their site. So it's going to be an interesting challenge, and I'm just kicking off that project right now, and how that's going to work with the multilingual and translational. The product catalog is still being our major challenge. So the amount of volume of products and the duplication of products that each site uses. So we need to come up with a solution on how best to store these products for our sites. Then once we've migrated it all, how we're going to manage 160 different websites. Change management, as we're seeing already, we've gone to the business, we've told them about Drupal already, but because they get stuck back in their day-to-day business, they sort of forgot about it. So we need to keep on top of them and say, look, Drupal is coming, you need to start thinking about designing and working with us and telling us what your current problems are, and then how to best implement that going forward. We're looking at implementing an FCL Drupal team for the core modules that we're looking at supporting across Flight Centre, and then maybe working on more of an iteration, agile type methodology there, because as there's so many different brands, there's so many different requests and so many different ways to do things. So if we have we're looking at building that FC Drupal core team to assist with that. Lessons to share. It's right people, right skills. So I think we've been lucky with the guys that we've hired from Brisbane at the moment. They've helped us tremendously, especially with Vladimir from Technocrat. They've assisted with the kickoff of the product import. But it just goes to show, I know people are saying it's really hard to find good people, but I guess it's horses for courses, because initially we wanted just to get sites up there, set some standards in place, and then start looking at the heavy lifting of the websites. Yeah, there's a module for everything, and I think I've just skipped the module process that we've implemented at Flight Centre. So I took the process that's currently out there in the Drupal community and basically integrated into the Flight Centre way of doing things. So because we're set up with a multi-site website, if I was a junior developer and I needed to implement a feature, but they couldn't figure out how to do it, so what's the process? We don't want to just go out there and do the whole, look for the modules themselves and come back and go, hey, I've got a module, and then the senior developer comes in and goes, well, you've actually got a module that does that for you. So what we do is, we got a process. First thing to do is go and look on our sites, is there a module that will do what you need? If there isn't, go and ask someone first. And if there isn't from that, then go out and search for it, or do we need to look at extending or creating it? And this all happens before they actually go out into the Drupal community and start looking for modules. And we're going to actually look at KPIing them on this particular process, because I think it's critically important on how many modules we start installing on these websites, because that becomes an issue going forward. So if we find developers are starting to push up all these new modules without going through these processes, then we've got a bit of an issue, and then we need to manage that issue. Business requirements gathering. So this has completely changed the way that I work with my customers at the moment. So no more coming to us, no more of the business coming in with all these fancy Photoshop documents. We go, I got a responsive site here. I'm like, oh, okay. Have you thought about this? We've got to go through a whole new different process. So just be aware that it's hard to change the mindset of something that's been already involved, so you've got to be patient with the customers. Change in project processes. So at the moment we do work in an agile type of methodology, but it's more based on a priority management system, because we get a number of priorities from all different types of angles. And looking at making sure that you manage that in a way that it doesn't affect all the day-to-day business, as well as with the developers as well, going forward in the core team is what I'm trying to say. Consistently review work. So I'm rigorously making sure we review the code. Any types. It doesn't have to be the code itself. It could be the modules, or the way someone's created someone. So we get there in the team each once a week, and I go in there and go, what the hell is this? Or no, this is a good idea. Or have you thought about this? And this is actually feedback that we get from all angles, and it's actually assisted a lot of removal of unnecessary modules. And another thing to think about is there will be resistance to change. So Flight Centre prides itself on, people and retaining the best people and ensuring that these people grow and all that sort of stuff. And once, some developers who stay on an existing system might enjoy it. So there's going to be resistance to change, and it's all about how you manage that. Is this the career path that they want to go? They want to stay on the front end side and just look at different ways that you can help assist them with that career. Was that it? And I think that's it. Questions? Sure. Oh. I'll talk. Yep. Do you want to summarize the question again?
Building small teams away from day-to-day business, developers' resistance to change.
Sure. So I guess I'll probably answer one part of it, and Simon could probably assist with the other parts. So, like I said before, we had an issue and a different sort of challenge at our office where we were outgrowing the number of seats, so we sort of had to move anyway. There was an office available, so we thought it was a good idea to help with the migration, that we moved the Drupal team that way. But in saying that, how do we keep the buy-in and going for that? So that actually happened after we got the buy-in from the business, and Simon could probably mention a bit more about that. But how I've seen that we've managed it so far, so I'm the lead of the project development team and probably of the corporate side, so I work with the corporate business. Simon's the lead of the booking engine side of things and the mobile development side of things, and we've also got a third team leader who is assisting with the Drupal migration, but is also looking after the day-to-day business with the existing websites. And in that case, because that took me out of that role, we actually had to temporarily promote someone as an assistant team leader to take away from my day-to-day work. So within that, because we're all on the same page with how Drupal worked, just because we were away and keeping everyone across how everything works on a week-to-week basis, and these guys being so close to the business, that was one way we managed the buy-in.
Just to add to the moving of the team as well, it allowed for the guys that knew Drupal and are advanced in Drupal to iron out a lot of the bugs that we were going to have just in terms of our infrastructure as well inside Flight Centre. Anyone who's worked in big corporations probably knows that the IT infrastructure can be a challenge in terms of proxies and all sorts of other things. So had we just got like the junior guys to be involved straight away, they would have just been hitting brick walls constantly. And also Carl's team sort of, in a lot of cases, went in a certain direction and went, oh, hold on, this isn't working, let's do something else. So if we'd got a lot of people who weren't familiar with Drupal to all be combined and involved in the conversation and everything at the very beginning, they probably would have been a bit frustrated with that, and some people still are frustrated with that happening sometimes. So that's another thing that we have to manage. In terms of like buying from the business and getting Drupal off the ground, I think, initially there was like a core team of us that just knew that the way we're doing things was wrong, so we had to change, and we got buy-in that change had to happen. So we did have that from the top down. Like everyone was agreed that we had to change something. So then it was just a case of, okay, well, what are we going to choose? And I guess it's just management having confidence in us to choose the right solutions based on other projects we've had successes in, but also just demonstrating that, well, here's the site we've built. Within Flight Centre, we have a concept of you can earn extra money by doing projects on the side. So we just factored that in to build a site in Drupal and say, well, look, here's what we did in a couple of days. Look how good it is. And then probably the thing that tipped it over the edge was engaging with Acquia and having that enterprise level support and saying, well, look at these other big sites that use it. We'll be fine in terms of it falling over, and someone will be there to answer your phone call. All those things that always need to be answered. So hopefully that covers that one. Okay, so the question is what's happening with the product catalog moving forward and how that integrates with the booking system. Well, I look after the booking system on a day-to-day basis, and the way that that's set up is it's really not any content that needs to be managed, so it's completely bespoke, and the long-term plan for that, there is actually a project right now that we're running with to rewrite it in Symfony, which is kind of, we've chosen Symfony because Drupal 8's coming, so let's get the guys skilled up in that. We'll have some skill in that area by the time. My team that runs the booking engine is PHP based, so we're fine with running that. In terms of the product catalog, we don't know. There's a bit of a question mark at the moment. They are replacing that, and that's kind of a separate stream of work that's happening. And we're kind of waiting to see how that pans out, and then they'll let us know, I guess, how that's going to integrate with Drupal. We're keen to talk to SBS actually and see what they're planning as well, and see if we can glean anything from them. At the moment, we're simply exporting all the products from the current product catalog and into Drupal. Does that scale long term? That's something that we need to answer as well.
The question was, summary, and correct me if I'm wrong, is how do we manage content as we go through the development life cycle for particular sites? And that was one of our very first questions that we actually had when we were implementing our first site, or even migrating a site across. At the moment, what we do is when we push a site live, if it's an existing site, then really we've got to tell that existing site to put a freeze on for the content, and that's something that you need to work with the business. They need to actually run with that particular problem themselves and then come back to us with a time range and just say, look, this is what we're going to do. This is the amount of time we can give you, because next week we've got a massive distributed mail that we want to send out, and we want our site to be up and ready and all the bugs ironed out. So some of the solutions to this is, it's one of them, you think they're obvious, but they're really not, because what if the site goes live, it's fine, but then there's a bug and the CDM goes out. How do you stop this? How do you stop the content developers or people signing up to things as we're trying to push patches out? So we actually haven't come up with that particular problem yet. With the migration of the sites across from the existing, it's all about just freezing the content, making sure the business sign off, and then with the developer workflow, because of the way Acquia is actually set up, it's quite easy to manage, moving databases across to different environments. So basically a drag and drop, and so we're not too worried about that. But you're right, if a developer wanted to work against the latest content or loaded content on the site, so then what's the workflow from that? So there's a couple of different things we've done at the moment. One with Acquia, we can actually drag down databases to different environments, and the developers were using a Vagrant provisioning solution for the technical people out there. So that just enables them just to choose whatever database they actually want to download and then put onto their local development environment and start building against. That question will probably pop up a bit more as the bigger sites start coming along with larger modules and the core modules for Flight Centre as we start rolling them out, how we're going to manage that. So, yep. Any more? Yep, sure. I don't have a... the question was, can I elaborate a bit more on our single sign-on solution? Yep, so this was a bit of a process in itself. So like I've said before, we use Google for a lot of our systems, so our emails, Google Docs and all that sort of stuff, and a lot of our documentation's actually on the Google Wiki sites internally. So we identified that we already have a heap of passwords that we need to log into all different types of systems, and I think one of the key wins was, what actually is available externally for us to integrate with Drupal, and that people currently use in day-to-day in Flight Centre, and that was the Gmail login. So going into the internal Flight Centre security team and the people who manage Gmail internally, they let us know that there was a SAML solution, or simple SAML implementation available, and obviously there's a module for that for Drupal. So we had to work rigorously with the FC internal system. So now basically if someone wants to log into the Drupal system, what they see now is if they go into / whatever the login URL is, won't tell you at the moment, and they just punch in the same logins that they would for their email, they actually get redirected to the Flight Centre Google Mail login screen where they will punch those details in, and then once that's been authenticated, then it'll actually log them into the Drupal system as a particular role or a permission. Any?
Sure. So the question is, we're doing some work in Symfony 2 already, and how are we planning on migrating to Drupal 8? Or have we put any thought? Sure. To be honest, we probably haven't thought that far ahead in terms of how we migrate to Drupal 8. In my personal opinion, Symfony 2 is a great framework, so it ticked all the boxes we needed for the other piece of work that we were doing. So why not kill two birds with one stone, and instead of having the guys use Laravel or something else, may as well use Symfony. And then when the time comes, well, we'll have a team that can then help with the other guys. But we really need to get everything onto Drupal 7, I think, first. I don't know, when's Drupal 8 going to be production ready and ready, enterprise ready, and then we can go from there.
All right. That's pretty much the end of the day, except for I've organised 3 special surprises for you. And the first is that the bar will open early. But before that happens, I've got 2 special guest stars. Dries is here to just quickly give us a kind of overview of where he's at with Drupal 8, and he's the founder of Drupal, so it's fantastic to have him here. And we also have Holly, who is the new executive director of the Drupal Association, and she'll say a few quick words as well. So let's welcome Dries and Holly.
All right. So I was actually just pulled in, like I was walking by, so I'm not actually wearing my business attire. but I hope that's fine. I don't know how many minutes do I have, roughly? Do you know? Yeah, 10 minutes is fine. So how many people are new to Drupal here? Okay, quite a few people. How many people have been to a DrupalCon before? Okay, not that many people. So basically, let me talk a little bit about Drupal 8. Before I talk about Drupal 8, let me give you the 30-second history, I guess. So I started the Drupal project 13 years ago, roughly, out of my dorm room, kind of by accident. That's actually a long story, which I can tell in only a few minutes, but worked on Drupal in my spare time for 7.5 years, and then created a company called Acquia, which is where I work today, and then also co-founded the Drupal Association, and still today I'm the project lead of Drupal. I do a lot of different things, but quite a bit of my time is spent working on Drupal 8, which is the next major version of Drupal. And so I want to talk a little bit about that without slides, without preparation, so please bear with me. So if I think about Drupal 8, then there's a number of big themes that we're working on. I would say the biggest theme by far is mobile. Obviously mobile is a big trend, and mobile means many different things to many different people. But when I talk about mobile, I talk about a number of these different things. One is building great mobile web experiences, experiences for mobile browsers that run on your smartphones. And so that means things like HTML5 out of the box in Drupal 8, responsive design. So we're converting all of the Drupal themes to responsive design. We're doing a lot of other smart optimizations to make it easier for people to not only visit Drupal sites, but also to administer content from mobile devices, whether it's tablets or smartphones. Sort of the other side of mobile is native mobile applications. Applications that run on iOS or Android devices, things like that. And to do so, we've basically adopted a framework called Symfony, which is an open source PHP framework into Drupal 8 core, which enabled us to do a lot of work around web services. And so every piece of content, which we call an entity in Drupal, will automatically have RESTful web service APIs associated with it, which will make it very easy for people to build native mobile applications. So I can go into a lot more detail, but I would say that's one major area of improvement in Drupal 8. Another big thing is improving the authoring experience. Like if Drupal is being criticized today, it's often because it's a little hard to use for end users, meaning people that create content on the website. And so it's been a major area of work for us. We've done a lot of different things in that area, and we continue to do more things. But these are things that include a better toolbar, a responsive toolbar that works on multiple devices, so people can actually navigate the Drupal administrative pages from a mobile device. It also includes something called in-place editing. If you haven't seen it, there's some videos online of what that means, but it basically means that on every page, you can go into an in-place editing mode, and then you click on a title, you click on a body, you click on an author name or a taxonomy term, and you can basically quickly make changes in line, which will make it very easy for people to edit content. We're also redesigning the content creation page or the content edit page. We're adding WYSIWYG to core, which is something which we never had in Drupal. And so we're adding that to the core platform and so forth. So lots and lots of improvements there as well. So I would say that's probably the biggest second section of work. We're doing a lot of work to make it easier for developers. And so one of the biggest challenges, I don't want to say a lot of negative things about Drupal, but I just want to be honest, but one of our challenges is because we're growing so fast, it can be a challenge to find Drupal developers. And that's something that the Drupal Association is also working really hard on to make this better, and it's why we have these conferences like the one we're at. But from a technical point of view, what we've chosen to do is, as I mentioned, we've adopted Symfony. And so while Drupal is a modern framework, and it's a good framework, we want to make sure we build it for the future. And so we've adopted Symfony to Drupal 8 core, which brings sort of new design patterns to Drupal 8, which are becoming common practice in our industry. So we hope that will actually attract a lot of people to Drupal. It will make it easier for professionally trained developers, engineers and developers, if you will, to come into the Drupal community, because it removes some Drupal-isms, as we call them, from the Drupal code base. So I think these are sort of the big three things, if you can group them into categories that we've been working on. But there's many other things. We've already accepted over 3,700 patches from over 1,000 different people into Drupal 8 core, and we're not quite done yet. So I guess to wrap it up, let me talk a little bit about the timing, because it's going to be the first question. When is it ready? And so right now we are still in the development cycle. On February 18th, so in only a few weeks, we will enter a kind of a new phase, which we call the feature freeze. And that means we shift focus from adding new features to polishing the features that we have added. So that allows us to make user interface improvements, user experience improvements, but also for developers what we call the developer experience. So we'll be working on refining what we've added. After that, we switch to code freeze, which means we stop refining things, polishing things, and we focus on fixing bugs, with the goal to get Drupal 8 out of the door by the end of this year. So we're still, quite a while away from the official Drupal 8 release, but we're also getting closer and closer by the day. So it's kind of the short version. If you want to learn more, there is a longer version tomorrow in my keynote. And then I'm also around all of this week if you want to talk more about that. I guess I'll give the floor to Holly, unless we want to do questions, or it's up to you guys. There's a question. What is it? The question is, what do I foresee as the biggest struggle for Drupal? Is that the question? It's a good question. Well, it depends a little bit on who that person is. Like, if it's companies trying to build a Drupal site, sometimes it's finding Drupal talent, to be honest. If it's a developer, it is the technical learning curve of Drupal. It's a complex system, and it takes a little bit of time to wrap your arms around that. And so, that's why we try to grow the ecosystem, so there's more, Drupal shops available to help organizations adopt Drupal. I think that's a real barrier. And then for developers adopting Drupal, that's why we try to, make it easier for them to learn Drupal by adopting these new code patterns and things like that. But I would say the biggest hurdle holding back Drupal as a whole is the lack of Drupal talent, in my opinion. And that's a very hard one to solve. And we're trying to solve that in many different ways, from organizing these events to encouraging people to write books, from companies that organize professional training, to talking to universities and schools to try and get Drupal into their curriculum. So it's not an easy one, but we try to address it from all fronts. Oof, more questions. All right. All right. So in Drupal 8, I didn't really talk about that, but we refactored the configuration management stuff. It's quite technical to explain, but in essence, the challenge that we had is that we mixed configuration with content in the database. And so it makes it really hard to push configuration changes from a staging website to a production website, because on the production website, the content keeps changing because people are editing it, or visitors are adding comments and all of these things. So you have this challenge where things are moving here, and then your developers are making configuration changes there, and then you need to just push the configuration changes. So that was a challenge. We fixed that by creating clear separation between configuration and content, And then we've also, we've basically decided to store configuration in files instead of the database, which is a big design decision. And that's a great thing because it allows us to manage configuration as if it were code, meaning we can commit it to a versioning system, a code management system like Git or Subversion, which means we can do diffs on them. We can see what configuration changes were made by whom. We can roll back to a previous configuration of a Drupal site. And hopefully we'll also be able to lock down configuration so that nobody can make unexpected changes. So there's a couple of advantages to that architecture. And that's pretty much done. Still have a little bit of work to do on that, but it's mostly there. Right, I'll do one more question and then I'll give the floor to Ollie. Right, before I answer a question, let me ask a follow-up question. So what specifically was the problem in your mind? Right. So the readiness of the contributed modules? Right. 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 So I think it's a great question. So a couple of things. So the way Drupal development works is we release Drupal core, and then a lot of the contributed modules still need to be updated. And particularly in Drupal 7, it was a challenge because once we released Drupal 7 core, the views module decided to basically refactor. I mean, they decided to refactor views, which is the most popular module in Drupal 7. And there's a lot of other modules depending on views. And so it kind of created this cascading effect of modules waiting and not being ready. It's not just views, but views was a big part of that. Now, to some extent, we'll always have this problem because some developers, they won't start upgrading their modules until they find a customer that's willing to pay for these modules to be upgraded. However, we've tried to fix the views problem by actually adding views to Drupal 8 core and refactoring it as we added it to Drupal core. And so that's something that we do in general, meaning as soon as some of these contributed modules become what I call infrastructure, meaning every developer tends to use them, or almost every developer tends to use them, we really seriously consider adding them to Drupal core to remove exactly those challenges that you faced. And so we've added a number of key contributed modules to Drupal 8 core, which will hopefully take away a lot of the pain. But we can't take away all of the pain because some modules won't be instantly ready. The other thing I'll add is that in Drupal 7, we added a test framework. Like in Drupal 6, we didn't have any unit testing, which sounds shocking. But we've added unit testing and test frameworks to Drupal 7. And now in Drupal 8, we really start to see the benefits because we've now over, I think it's 40,000 tests. And today, all of these tests pass. And so I firmly believe that Drupal 8 is, while there's a lot of work to be done, we have a lot of infrastructure in place to make sure that it will be very solid. So, these are two elements to the answer, but there will always be that part. I think a lot of it also comes down to using best practices and being very careful about what modules you use. And I would encourage you, or if there's end users here, to work with experienced Drupal companies or experts to help them to help you pick your modules, because if you use a module which is kind of not commonly used, chances are slim that that module will be one of the modules that will be available for Drupal 8 the day Drupal 8 is released. But if you stick with the sort of the well-known modules, your ability to upgrade will be much higher. So these are just a few elements to that question. I mean, we can talk about your question for an hour. It's a very tough one. And there's other things which we want to consider doing in Drupal 9. So, all right, I can. All right, I'll try and find you, and we can talk about your question offline. All right, thank you.
Hi guys, I know I'm standing between you and beer, so I won't take too long. My name's Holly Ross, and I'm the new executive director of the Drupal Association. I'm so new, in fact, that this is my 4th day on the job, but I'm American, so it's actually my 3rd because I'm in the future. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. It's been a really great way to start the job. And I want to thank all the speakers today and Zena for helping to organize this. We had a lot of great sponsors, Powerful CMS and Acquia and Cross-Functional and Technocrat. Owen, our lead here in making the whole event happen, has been fantastic. And I also want to thank 2 of the Drupal Association staff members. You may have seen Neil running around like a crazy person. Hi, Neil. Or Stephanie over at registration. They have been really wonderful at making this whole thing go, which is exactly what the DA is all about, right? We exist to help the Drupal community gather, and that is true whether you eat Drupal code for breakfast, whether you own a shop or you're just getting started. So we help bring people together around the Drupal project, but we're also responsible for keeping the project up and running. And we do that by paying for the servers and the hosting and keeping D.O up and running. So that's our responsibility, is to make the project work. And there's that technical side and there's that community side. And the community, of course, is the fun stuff, and that's where you come in. So there are lots of ways for you to be engaged in the Drupal Association, besides contributing to the code or the modules and contributing to the project. As Dries said, there is a desperate need to make more Drupalistas out there, right? So we help do that in a number of ways right now, very concretely. One is Global Training Days. So we will organize the first in the middle of March. And that's a day to get folks to train other folks in Drupal code. And we have a variety of curriculum that we can get to you. So if you're interested in that, you can come on over to association.drupal.org. There's some information up on our site. You can also, of course, get engaged in the DrupalCons around the world. The next one happens to be in Portland, where it is currently gray, as it should be. I don't know what you guys do with all the sunshine. It's coming up in Portland in May. Session submissions, if you're interested in speaking and helping to share what you know about Drupal with the community, you can still submit sessions through February 15th, so you can look that up. And of course, we have camps all around the world as well. It's a great place to get engaged as well. Finally, there are 2 other ways that you can help support the work of the DA and the project in general. One is to become a Drupal Association member, right? Becoming a member obviously gives us some of the financial support we need to keep the project going. Also helps us build that strong community. But the other thing that you can do, especially because I'm new, is really make sure that you share your opinions with us and with me. The project is really supported by a very diverse community. And that diversity of opinions is really messy. You may run across that once or twice. But it does make the project stronger in the end. And I really hope that you'll contribute to that messiness, that fun messiness, by sharing all your thoughts with us and the community. And to help make that happen, I hope that you will join us over in the bar. If Dries is still out there, he needs to plug his ears. You'll join us over in the bar where we'll pick up the first round for you tonight. So come on over to the bar, and thanks for being here, and thanks for listening about the DA.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Holly. Welcome to the job. And Holly's got her first week on the job and her birthday all in one week in Sydney. So you thanked everyone.
29. Okay. 29 if anyone asks.
Just by way of introduction, my name's Owen Lansbury. I've been working with the Drupal Association and the local organising team over the past year to make DrupalCon happen. And thank you all for coming to the business day. We kind of put it in quite at the last minute and weren't sure what the response would be, and obviously it's been fantastic. So very appreciative of the attendance that you've made, and obviously to all the people that you thank, the speakers, the sponsors, and Zena especially for organising this day. And we're going to